The new special counsel, Jack Smith, is a former acting U.S. attorney who said the investigations would not pause or flag under his watch. We're going to have more on him in just a moment. Let's get right to CNN senior legal affairs correspondent Paula Reed. What else, Paula, did Attorney General Merrick Garland say about appointing this special counsel?
Well, John, we knew this was something under consideration within the Justice Department. And during that speech, he pointed to the extraordinary nature of these cases and said in order to protect the independence of the Justice Department, he had to make this move. Now, it was also notable that he said he's not going to be overseeing the day-to-day operations of the special counsel. Now, under the regulations, if there are any charges that the special counsel wants to bring, those are subject to the approval of the Attorney General. But it's interesting, he wants to really establish that this is going to be an independent entity that is going to be operating separate from the Justice Department, except for the particular instances where they may be required to check in with the Attorney General. But it's unclear, John, if this is really going to satisfy critics and anyone who wants to claim that this is partisan. The former president's spokesman has already said today that this is, quote,
okay, so what I'm about to tell you is absolutely massive, and it's based on actual evidence that's now public record. Jack Smith, the special counsel who investigated Trump, just released a report that is so damning, so thoroughly documented, so airtight that legal experts across the political spectrum are saying the same thing. If Trump didn't have presidential immunity, he'd be convicted and sentenced to prison. Not maybe, not possibly, definitely. The evidence is that strong. We're talking about emails, call logs, grand jury testimony, personal notes from White House insiders, all meticulously documented and corroborated, all showing Trump personally directing criminal schemes to overturn the 2020 election, all proving beyond any reasonable doubt that Trump committed federal crimes. And Jack Smith's conclusion, stated plainly in his official report, is that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. Those aren't my words. Those aren't partisan talking points. That's the special counsel's official finding after years of investigation. And it's devastating. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join, and if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right? Let's get back to the video.
Investigations, and he was angry. It continued in an interview that he did after that announcement. He said, I have been proven innocent for 6 years on everything from fake impeachments to Mueller, who found no collusion, and now I have to do it more. It is not acceptable. It is so unfair. The worst politicization of justice. The Republican Party has to stand up and fight. And that last line I do want to point to here, because this is coming at a time when we know that there have been a number of Republicans who have said it's time to move on from Trump, many saying that he has too much baggage, and some of these legal battles are what they are talking about when it comes to that baggage. And in the past, some of these kind of incidents, including the search of Mar-a-Lago, have galvanized Republicans, but it's really unclear if that's going to happen this time around, John.
So let me set the stage for you, because you need to understand what we're dealing with here. Jack Smith wasn't some partisan hack appointed to go after Trump. He's a career prosecutor, someone who's spent decades handling complex criminal cases, someone who's prosecuted war crimes, public corruption, major fraud cases. He's got a reputation for being thorough, careful, and nonpartisan. And he was appointed as special counsel specifically to investigate Trump's conduct after the 2020 election and Trump's handling of classified documents. And for 2 years, Smith and his team conducted one of the most comprehensive criminal investigations in American history. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses. They reviewed millions of documents. They presented evidence to grand juries. They obtained indictments. They built cases that were ready for trial. And then Trump won the 2024 election. And that changed everything, because there's a long-standing Justice Department policy that you can't prosecute a sitting president. The idea is that criminal prosecution would interfere with the president's ability to govern, that it would be too disruptive to have a president defending himself in criminal court while trying to run the country. So after Trump won the election, Jack Smith had to make a decision, and he decided to follow DOJ policy and withdraw the federal cases. But before he closed up shop and left the Justice Department, he wrote a report, a comprehensive, detailed report documenting everything his investigation found, everything Trump did, every crime the evidence proved, and that report, released in January 2025, is what has the legal world absolutely stunned right now. Because the evidence Smith compiled is overwhelming. Like genuinely, undeniably, irrefutably overwhelming. We're not talking about circumstantial evidence or questionable testimony or documents that could be interpreted different ways. We're talking about direct proof of Trump's involvement in criminal schemes, personal emails where Trump discussed the plans, phone call logs showing when Trump called state officials to pressure them, grand jury testimony from White House insiders describing meetings where Trump directed the schemes, personal notes from aides documenting what Trump said and did, all of it corroborated, all of it verified, all of it admissible in court, and all of it proving that Trump committed federal crimes. The specific crimes Smith documented are serious. Conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, that's the January 6th certification of electoral votes. Trump and his co-conspirators tried to prevent Congress from certifying Biden's victory. Smith has the evidence, the meetings where they planned it, the actions they took, the intent behind it, all documented. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, that's using dishonest means to interfere with government functions. Trump's fake elector scheme, his pressure campaigns against state officials, his attempts to get the Justice Department to declare the election fraudulent when it wasn't. Smith has proof of all of it. Making false statements. Trump repeatedly claimed the election was stolen, even after being told by his own advisors that there was no evidence of fraud. Smith has testimony from the people who told Trump the truth, has records of Trump continuing to make false claims anyway. That's a federal crime. And then there's the classified documents case. Trump took hundreds of classified documents to Mar-a-Lago after leaving office, refused to return them when asked, obstructed efforts to recover them, showed classified materials to people without security clearances. Smith has surveillance footage, has testimony from Trump's own employees, has documents proving Trump personally directed the obstruction. It's all there, all documented, all proven. And Smith's conclusion, after reviewing all this evidence, is simple and direct. Without presidential immunity, Trump would be convicted at trial. Not might be, would be, because the evidence is that strong, because there's no viable defense. Because any jury looking at this evidence would have no choice but to convict. Legal experts are calling this unprecedented. They're saying they've never seen a case this airtight against a president, never seen evidence this comprehensive, never seen proof this clear. And judges who've reviewed portions of Smith's evidence have made similar findings. They've rejected Trump's attempts to suppress evidence or dismiss charges. They've unsealed portions of Smith's report so the public can see what the investigation found. They've made it clear that the only thing protecting Trump from prosecution right now is the fact that he's president. That immunity is the only barrier between Trump and a criminal conviction, and everyone understands what that means. The moment Trump is no longer president, the moment that immunity expires, prosecution becomes not just possible but inevitable, because the evidence is sitting there, ready to be presented, ready to convict, and there's nothing Trump can do to make it go away. All right, so let's dig into the specifics of what Jack Smith's investigation actually found, because the details matter here. This isn't just about general wrongdoing. This is about specific criminal acts that Smith has documented with overwhelming evidence. So we need to talk about the fake elector scheme, the pressure on state officials, the obstruction of the January 6th certification, and the classified documents case, because each of these represents a separate crime. Each has its own evidence trail. And together they paint a picture of someone who was willing to do whatever it took, legal or illegal, to stay in power. Let's start with the fake elector scheme, because this is where Smith's evidence is particularly devastating. The basic idea was to create alternate slates of electors in states Biden won. These fake electors would meet, cast their votes for Trump, and send those votes to Congress. Then during the certification on January 6th, Trump's team would try to create confusion about which electors were legitimate, maybe get Congress to delay certification, maybe get Mike Pence to reject the real electors and count the fake ones. It was a convoluted plan, but also clearly illegal, because these weren't the real electors. They had no authority to cast electoral votes. Creating fake documents claiming they were electors is fraud. Submitting those fake documents to Congress is another crime. And conspiring to do all of this is conspiracy. And Smith has evidence showing Trump was directly involved, not just aware of the scheme, but actively directing it. We're talking about emails between Trump and his legal team discussing which states to target for fake electors, call logs showing Trump contacted state party officials to coordinate the plan, grand jury testimony from people who were in meetings where Trump approved the strategy and directed his team to move forward, personal notes from White House aides documenting Trump's instructions. All of this creates a clear documentary trail linking Trump to the fake elector conspiracy. And that's what makes Smith's case so strong. It's not one person's word against Trump's. It's multiple witnesses backed by contemporaneous documents all telling the same story. The pressure campaign against state officials is another area where Smith's evidence is rock solid. After the 2020 election, Trump personally called election officials in multiple states, trying to get them to change the results or declare the election invalid. The most famous example is the call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, where Trump asked him to find exactly enough votes to overcome Biden's margin. That call was recorded. Smith has the audio, has the transcript, has testimony from everyone who was on the call, and it's clear evidence of Trump trying to pressure a state official to alter election results. That's illegal. It's attempting to interfere with a lawful election process, and Trump did it on a recorded line knowing people were listening. But Georgia wasn't the only state. Smith has evidence of Trump making similar calls to officials in Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and other battleground states, has testimony from those officials about what Trump said and what he was asking them to do, has phone records proving the calls happened, has contemporaneous notes from participants documenting the conversations. All of this shows a pattern. Trump systematically pressuring election officials across multiple states to help him overturn the election. That's not one mistake or one questionable judgment call. That's a coordinated conspiracy to interfere with the democratic process, and Smith has the evidence to prove it. The obstruction of the January 6th certification is where things get really serious, because this is about Trump trying to stop Congress from performing its constitutional duty. On January 6th, Congress was meeting to certify the electoral votes and officially declare Biden the winner. That's a mandatory constitutional process. It has to happen. And Trump tried to prevent it. First, by pressuring Mike Pence to reject electoral votes, which Pence had no authority to do. Smith has evidence of multiple meetings between Trump and Pence where Trump pushed this plan. Has testimony from people who witnessed those conversations. Has documents showing Trump's legal team prepared memos arguing Pence had powers he didn't actually have. All of this shows Trump knew he was asking Pence to violate the Constitution, but pushed anyway. When Pence refused, Trump turned to the mob. On January 6th, Trump gave a speech telling his supporters to march to the Capitol, told them to fight, told them the election was being stolen and they needed to stop it. And then he watched as the mob stormed the Capitol, as they attacked police officers, as they hunted for Pence and members of Congress. And Smith has evidence showing what Trump was doing during those hours. Has testimony from White House aides about Trump watching the violence on TV, about Trump refusing to call off the mob even as his advisors begged him to, about Trump resisting sending in help to protect the Capitol. All of this shows Trump wasn't just a passive observer. He incited the mob. He let them attack the Capitol. He did nothing to stop the violence for hours. And all of that was in service of preventing the certification, of stopping Congress from declaring Biden the winner. That's obstruction of an official proceeding. That's conspiracy. That's potentially even seditious conspiracy, depending on how prosecutors frame it. The classified documents case is actually more straightforward in some ways because the evidence is so direct. When Trump left office, he took hundreds of classified documents to Mar-a-Lago. That's already problematic because classified materials are supposed to stay in government custody. But then Trump refused to return them when asked. The National Archives tried to get the documents back. Trump's lawyers negotiated, but Trump wouldn't comply fully. Eventually, the FBI had to get a search warrant and raid Mar-a-Lago to recover the documents. And even then, Trump and his team apparently tried to obstruct, moved boxes of documents, hid materials from investigators, destroyed evidence. Smith has surveillance footage from Mar-a-Lago showing boxes being moved around. Has testimony from Trump's employees about being directed to hide documents. Has proof that Trump showed classified materials to people who had no security clearance. All of this is documented, all of it provable, and all of it illegal. The obstruction in the documents case is particularly damning because Smith can show Trump personally directed it. Has testimony from employees who say Trump told them to move boxes or hide materials. Has evidence of Trump's lawyers being deceived about what documents Trump had. Has proof that Trump claimed he'd returned everything when he hadn't. That's obstruction of justice. That's making false statements to investigators. That's conspiracy if Trump coordinated with employees to hide evidence. And Smith has multiple witnesses willing to testify about all of it. People who were involved in moving documents. People who saw Trump show classified materials to visitors. People who can describe Trump's intent to keep the documents and prevent the government from recovering them. What makes Smith's overall case so powerful is that it's not just about individual crimes, it's about a pattern, a systematic effort by Trump to undermine democratic processes and place himself above the law, the fake electors, the pressure on state officials, the obstruction of certification, the refusal to return classified documents. All of it shows someone who believed rules didn't apply to him, who was willing to break laws to get what he wanted, who couldn't accept that he lost and was willing to do anything, including illegal things, to try to stay in power. That pattern makes it much harder to defend Trump's conduct as mistakes or honest disagreements about the law. Because when you see the same kind of behavior across multiple contexts, when you see someone repeatedly choosing illegal methods to achieve their goals, it shows criminal intent, shows consciousness of guilt, shows someone who knew what they were doing was wrong but did it anyway. And Smith's report makes this pattern explicit, lays out how all these different schemes were connected, how they were all in service of the same goal, keeping Trump in power despite losing the election, how Trump personally directed and coordinated them, how he knew they were illegal but pursued them anyway. And Smith backs all of this up with evidence, with witness testimony, with documents, with recordings, with surveillance footage. With everything a prosecutor needs to prove a case beyond reasonable doubt, legal experts who've reviewed Smith's report are uniform in their assessment. If this case went to trial, Trump would be convicted, not because of politics, not because of bias, but because the evidence is overwhelming, because there's no viable defense, because any jury looking at this evidence would have no choice but to find Trump guilty. The fact that judges have unsealed portions of Smith's report is significant, because judges don't unseal material unless they think it's important for the public to see, and the judges involved in Trump's cases have made it clear they think this evidence is important, that the public has a right to know what Smith found, that transparency matters even though prosecution is currently blocked by presidential immunity. And what those unsealed portions show is exactly what Smith says in his report: clear, direct, corroborated evidence of Trump committing federal crimes. Evidence that would convict him at trial if not for immunity. Evidence that's sitting there ready to be used the moment Trump is no longer president. The political implications of Smith's findings are enormous, because this isn't a partisan accusation. This is a formal finding by a special counsel after years of investigation. This is documented proof that Trump committed federal crimes. And everyone knows it now. The report is public. Parts of the evidence have been unsealed. Legal experts have reviewed it and reached the same conclusion: Trump committed crimes, would be convicted if prosecuted, is only avoiding trial because of presidential immunity. That's not speculation. That's the official finding of the special counsel's investigation. And it's going to hang over Trump's entire presidency. Every decision he makes, every policy he implements, every time he claims persecution or witch hunt. People can point to Smith's report and say, no, there was real evidence of real crimes. You're only avoiding prosecution because you're president. The question everyone is asking now is, what happens when Trump leaves office? Because presidential immunity doesn't last forever. At some point, Trump won't be president anymore. And at that point, nothing prevents prosecution. The evidence Smith compiled doesn't expire. The crimes don't disappear. The case can be refiled. New prosecutors can pick up where Smith left off. And based on Smith's report, based on the evidence he compiled, conviction would be virtually certain. Trump knows this. His lawyers know this. Everyone knows this, which is why Trump has every incentive to try to stay in power as long as possible, to delay leaving office, to find ways to extend immunity. Because the moment immunity ends, he's facing serious criminal charges backed by overwhelming evidence. And that's a terrifying prospect for any defendant, but especially for someone who spent their entire life avoiding consequences. Okay, so let's break this down into the key points, because there's so much here and we need to focus on what really matters. Point number one, Jack Smith's investigation produced what legal experts are calling the most comprehensive and well-documented case against a president in American history. This isn't about a few questionable actions or ambiguous evidence. This is about years of investigation resulting in overwhelming proof of multiple federal crimes. Smith and his team interviewed hundreds of witnesses, many of them Trump's own advisors and employees, people who saw what Trump did, who heard what Trump said, who participated in carrying out Trump's plans. And those witnesses provided detailed testimony about Trump's conduct, about meetings where illegal schemes were planned, about Trump's direct involvement, about Trump being warned his actions were illegal and doing them anyway. And it's not just testimony. Smith has documentary evidence to corroborate everything the witnesses said. Emails showing Trump discussing the fake elector plan phone records, proving Trump called state officials to pressure them. Meeting notes documenting Trump's instructions to his team. Text messages between conspirators coordinating their actions. All of this creates a complete picture. Multiple forms of evidence all pointing to the same conclusion. Trump committed federal crimes. And he did so knowingly and intentionally. That's what makes Smith's case so powerful. It's not, he said, she said. It's dozens of witnesses backed by thousands of documents, all telling a consistent story, all proving Trump's guilt. That's the kind of case prosecutors dream about, the kind that results in convictions nearly 100% of the time. Point number 2, the only thing preventing Trump's prosecution right now is presidential immunity. Not lack of evidence, not questions about whether crimes were committed, not uncertainty about whether Trump was involved. The evidence is there. The crimes are clear. Trump's involvement is proven. The only barrier is the DOJ policy that sitting presidents can't be prosecuted, and that's a policy, not a law. It's based on Office of Legal Counsel memos, not congressional statutes or constitutional provisions. Different legal scholars disagree about whether that policy is correct, whether it should apply in all circumstances, whether there are exceptions for particularly serious crimes. But regardless of those debates, the policy exists, and the Justice Department follows it. So Trump gets a temporary reprieve, a pause in prosecution that lasts as long as he's president. But here's the critical thing to understand. That reprieve is temporary. Presidential immunity doesn't erase the crimes, doesn't make the evidence inadmissible, doesn't prevent future prosecution. It just delays it, creates a pause. And the moment Trump is no longer president, that pause ends. The cases can be refiled, new prosecutors can take over where Smith left off. Grand juries can be reconvened, indictments can be reissued, and trials can proceed, with all the evidence Smith compiled, with all the witnesses ready to testify, with everything needed to secure convictions. That's why Smith's report emphasizes this point so strongly. The evidence is sufficient to convict. The cases are ready. Prosecution is only delayed, not prevented. And everyone should understand that the delay is temporary. Point number 3, the strength of Smith's evidence has massive political implications even though prosecution is currently blocked, because everyone knows now the report is public. The evidence has been reviewed by legal experts. The conclusions are clear. Trump committed federal crimes. Would be convicted if prosecuted is only avoiding trial because of immunity. That's not partisan speculation. That's the documented finding of a comprehensive investigation, and it changes the political calculus around Trump. Makes it harder for his allies to claim he's being persecuted, harder to argue the investigations were baseless, harder to maintain that Trump did nothing wrong, because Smith's report lays it all out, shows exactly what Trump did, shows exactly what laws he broke, shows exactly why it's criminal. Republicans who've been defending Trump face a difficult choice now. Do they continue claiming Trump's innocent even though Smith's report proves otherwise? Do they attack Smith as partisan even though he's a career prosecutor who documented everything meticulously? Do they argue that what Trump did wasn't really that bad, even though it involved trying to overturn an election? None of those positions are tenable. None of them hold up under scrutiny because Smith's evidence is too strong, too well documented, too clearly proven. So Republicans are largely avoiding the substance, focusing on procedural arguments, claiming the whole investigation was politically motivated, trying to change the subject. But they can't make the evidence go away, can't erase Smith's findings, can't prevent people from reading the report and reaching their own conclusions. Democrats are using Smith's findings aggressively in political messaging, pointing to the report as proof that Trump is a criminal who belongs in prison, arguing that only immunity is keeping him from being held accountable, warning that Trump will use his power as president to prevent any future prosecution. All of that resonates with voters who already distrust Trump, reinforces their concerns about him, gives them specific documented evidence to point to rather than just general concerns, and it puts pressure on Republicans to either defend Trump's documented criminal conduct or distance themselves from him. That's not an easy position for Republican lawmakers, especially those in competitive districts or who might be thinking about future campaigns, because defending someone who Smith's report proves committed federal crimes is politically risky. The legal community's reaction to Smith's report has been significant. Law professors, former prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, legal scholars across the political spectrum. Most of them have reached similar conclusions after reviewing Smith's evidence. Trump committed crimes. The evidence proves it. Conviction at trial would be virtually certain. Some have quibbled with specific charges or legal theories. Some have argued about whether presidential immunity should apply. But very few have disputed the core finding that Trump did what Smith says he did, that it was illegal, that the evidence is overwhelming. That consensus among legal experts matters because it shows this isn't just partisans making accusations, it's people who understand criminal law, reviewing the evidence and reaching conclusions based on legal merit. So, what happens next? Well, in the short term, not much changes legally. Trump is president, immunity applies, no prosecution while he's in office. But politically, everything has changed. Smith's report ensures that Trump's presidency will be defined in part by these findings, by the knowledge that he committed federal crimes and is only avoiding prosecution because of his position every time Trump claims he's being persecuted, every time he attacks prosecutors or judges, every time he argues the system is rigged. People can point to Smith's report, can say, no, there was real evidence of real crimes. You're just using your position to avoid accountability. That undermines Trump's narrative, makes it harder for him to play the victim, forces him to defend his actual conduct rather than just attacking his accusers. In the longer term, everything depends on what happens when Trump leaves office. If he serves out his term and then becomes a private citizen again, prosecution becomes possible. Smith's successor could refile the cases, could use all the evidence Smith compiled, could bring Trump to trial. And based on Smith's findings, conviction would be likely. Trump would face serious prison time for federal crimes. That's the scenario Trump fears most. That's why he has every incentive to try to stay in power, to delay leaving office, to find ways to extend or expand immunity. Because without that protection, he's facing criminal conviction and incarceration. But there are other scenarios. Trump could try to pardon himself, though the legality of that is questionable and it wouldn't apply to state charges. He could try to get Congress to grant him immunity, though that seems politically unlikely. He could try to run out the statute of limitations on some charges, though many of the crimes he's accused of have long limitation periods, or he could try to make a deal, agree not to run for office again in exchange for prosecutors agreeing not to file charges. That last option seems far-fetched given Trump's personality, but it's theoretically possible. Whatever happens, the existence of Smith's report and the evidence it documents ensures that the question of Trump's criminal accountability isn't going away. It will hang over his presidency and follow him after he leaves office. The precedent this sets for future presidents is important. Smith's investigation and report established that presidents can be investigated for criminal conduct. That evidence can be compiled even if prosecution is delayed. That comprehensive documentation of presidential crimes is possible and appropriate. Future special counsels investigating future presidents will point to Smith's work as a model. Will argue that thorough investigation and public reporting serves the public interest even when immediate prosecution isn't possible. That's a significant development in how we think about presidential accountability. Not perfect. Not a substitute for actual prosecution, but better than nothing. Better than letting criminal conduct go undocumented and unknown. The final point is this. Jack Smith's report proves something that many people suspected, but couldn't definitively establish before. Trump committed serious federal crimes in his effort to overturn the 2020 election. Not maybe. Not probably. Definitely. The evidence is overwhelming, documented, corroborated, ready for trial, and conviction would be virtually certain if not for presidential immunity. That's not a political opinion. That's the finding of a comprehensive criminal investigation conducted by a career prosecutor, and it means that anyone who understands the evidence, anyone who's read Smith's report, anyone who's reviewed the findings, knows that Trump is a criminal who belongs in prison. He's only avoiding that fate because of his position, because of a policy that prevents prosecuting sitting presidents. Not because he's innocent, not because the evidence is weak, but because he managed to win an election and regain the immunity that protects him. That's the reality. That's what Smith's report proves, beyond any doubt. And that's what makes this moment so significant. The truth is now documented. The evidence is now public. And everyone knows that but for immunity, Trump would be in prison. That knowledge doesn't put Trump behind bars, but it does ensure that his criminal conduct is established fact. That history will record what he did. That accountability, even if delayed, remains possible. And that's something.